All right, welcome to another Shy Hack Night from home. Uh, I am Joel Inwood, your host, and with me is my co-host, who is
Cameron.
looking at his
So,
computer.
hi everyone. Hope you are doing well and taking care.
Thank you. Yeah, doing pretty good. Doing pretty good. All right. Um, so tonight we're going to do things a little bit differently than we did last time. We're going to do our whole announcements and introductions suite and all that good stuff after our main presentation because we want to give you what you came here for. Um, and so without further ado, Shy Hack Night number 397 is City Bureau's Chicago COVID-19 Resource Finder. Mutual aid groups, social service organizations, and other outlets have done incredible work compiling resources. But the problem is, who has time to navigate 1,000 spreadsheets all across the internet? Well, I'll tell you who does. Pat Sier from City Bureau, and he is here tonight to show us City Bureau's Chicago COVID Resource Finder. So everybody at home, with your imagination, give a big round of applause to Pat. Take it away, Pat.
All right, let me thank you for that intro, Joel.
You're welcome.
Now for everyone's favorite game, can you see my screen?
I can.
Joel?
Going on.
Perfect, well, we'll go with that. So yeah, Joel gave an intro, so I'll just kind of get into this. So yeah, talking about the Chicago COVID Resource Finder. So yeah, I work at City Bureau. I've got some information up here, but in general, we're a nonprofit civic media organization with three main programs: a journalism fellowship, a week-free workshop around kind of media and non-media issues, as well as our documenters program, where we train and pay people to take notes or live tweet at public meetings. So the COVID Resource Finder, we don't only do those things. Where this really came in was around our work on information needs. So really our organization approaching journalism and this work with the idea that information isn't just a luxury. It's not just for people who have money. It's a utility. And especially right now, it's really important for people to have access to information they need. So yeah, I'm really here to talk about kind of how we did this and also why we made some of the decisions we did. So just some more details on the Resource Finder with a little GIF there. So we've got around, I think, over 1,300 vetted resources in kind of the controls and navigation are in 12 different languages. And overall, it's pretty simple filters. We're really not trying to do much fancy. And you can also access all the information over SMS if you text a number that we have on the site. So yeah, how did we get into this? The first thing we did right after some of those initial restrictions came in Chicago was we sent out a pretty open-ended survey to a lot of community groups and partners that we work with, as well as some we don't, around information needs. What were they seeing? What were people directly experiencing if they were answering it? And kind of just some things we mentioned a hotline initially on whether we thought that might be something that made sense for people. But yeah, I think it was something that was really important for us to do because, and it's also something I've struggled with at times because starting from feedback as opposed to getting it much only later in the process is something I've really had to learn over time. It's especially in the middle of a crisis, it's really tempting to kind of just jump in and start building something or start putting something out there. And I think it was really valuable that kind of we, from the beginning, even though we mentioned some specific things, really started from, hey, we're here, what do you need? So what we got from that was pretty a mixed bag. One of the biggest things people mentioned was misinformation, but being overloaded with information, that a lot of things weren't translated, but also that maybe a hotline wasn't specifically something that they were interested in at the time. But people generally wanted to stay in touch and be in further conversations with us. And so with those results, we did nothing initially. Before I kind of get in trouble later for this, we did do stuff. We kept in touch with people. We kept the conversations going. But in terms of this project didn't actually start until a little bit after that. From the responses we got, there wasn't a real clear identified need that we could fill into because at the time, outlets like Block Club Chicago, the city government were doing a really great job just getting initial information out there. So yeah, initially we really kind of took a step back and said, okay, I don't know if there's a way we can fit into this. But yeah, again, we continued those conversations. A lot of us individually on staff got involved in some of the mutual aid efforts. And as weird as it was really, looking back, one of my favorite parts of the process, because a lot of times you talk about starting with feedback, but kind of keep barreling on like, oh, these are just things you need to tweak. And I think it was just a really good point to remember that like sometimes doing nothing isn't always a bad thing. Like you can't break nothing, you can't hack nothing, you can't expose people's information on nothing. And so I think it was really good for us to take a step back and just kind of see that maybe this wasn't the time where we could fit in yet. So yeah, but over time we did keep those conversations going. The needs started to get clearer and we did start to get a picture of where we could fit in. So the main things we heard were a lot of things we heard initially, but kind of really reinstated with information overload. The resources people were finding, like the information wasn't always up to date or fully accurate. Translation was still a big thing, but also connectivity and access to that information. The picture on the right is actually one alderman's newsletter full of COVID resources, which is not to like name and shame them, but really just to say there's a lot of information that was coming out. And it was spread out across a bunch of spreadsheets, Slacks, like websites, like Joel was mentioning. So it's not necessarily that they organized that poorly, it's people were using the tools that they had to do the best they could do, which was great. And I think that's where we saw that we had some additional tools that we could kind of bring into the picture. So going back to feedback, after we kind of got the sense that some kind of resource guide could be useful, one of the first things we did was actually show an older project I'd worked on actually through Tri-Hack Night, the Illinois Reentry Resource Guide, just kind of as an example of like, hey, is this something you think would be useful? It made it a lot quicker because we're not actually doing a demo. It was there, it existed. And we really, at the beginning, were focused on just a lot of the social service providers we talked to, like what their use case was. Like, how would you use this? And also focusing on how you would use it rather than if people would use it. Because a lot of times, especially when you put something technology related in front of people, it's like people say, oh yeah, I'll use that. And I think people assume that because there's a power dynamic in how we treat like nonprofit workers versus tech workers in terms of whose work is deemed valuable. And a lot of the times, if you put an app in front of somebody, they're just the knee-jerk reactions to think that, oh, this is a very valuable thing I should do. When in reality, we tried to level with people and say, hey, how would you use this? We really want to make sure this supports the way you're currently doing things. And so from that, we got a lot of really useful information about how people would use it with clients, how they'd share it with people directly. And yeah, most of the categories we ended up using came straight from the things that people kept telling us people were asking them about. And so the reentry resource guide wasn't the only thing that I just pulled directly from. GovBook through the Chicago Reporter, their translation setup was actually initially copied and pasted in the way that we did our translation setup. And then the reentry resource guide itself was forked from a DataMade project, Probation Community Resources. So I've definitely reinvented the wheel enough times to know that I should really stop doing that and pull from things that are out there as much as possible. So those are kind of the overall issues, but one of the big things to identify from the beginning was that a lot of these weren't tech issues necessarily. So from doing that earlier resource guide specific to reentry, I definitely run into the fact that the majority of any kind of resource guide, which gets mentioned as a civic tech project a lot, part of the reason that it doesn't always work out is that the overwhelming majority of the work is compiling that information and keeping it up to date, because the second it starts going out of date, people are going to trust it a lot less. It's people get suspicious and they just stop seeing the thing as useful. And at the same time, this isn't really an easy process to automate. You can scrape things. We have a separate project that's totally dedicated to that. But with as fast as things were changing and the fact that the whole problem was they weren't really in one spot, that was going to end up taking a lot more time and really still not result in great resources. So yeah, one of the things that really made it kind of made us think that this was a good project for us is that I mean, journalists fact checking is kind of bread and butter. That's a really important thing. And also we could devote 3 full-time staff for a couple of weeks, we're just working on the resources. And that's in addition to me mostly working on the website of things. So shout out to Alex, Sarah, and Justin, who put a ton of time into going through as much of these lists as possible. Because yeah, it really wouldn't have been doable without that. And so this is the like quote unquote backend. It's Airtable, which if people aren't familiar, it's kind of like a souped up Google Sheets that's got a little bit of a friendlier interface. What's nice about it is that instead of doing some kind of built out SQL database, it looks like this. And then it comes with forms built in. It's a lot easier to edit. It's a lot more approachable, and it doesn't make me a bottleneck in terms of updates. And I think that was just really valuable in terms of like, I'm the only developer at City Bureau, and I don't want to be that bottleneck. If we're going to have a lot of people working on this, it needed to be simple and straightforward so that everybody could kind of pitch in as they wanted to. And it also makes it easy for people to provide suggestions because there's form functionality, kind of like Google Forms, that we're actually using directly on the site. And the site itself is actually static. There's no server backend for the main resource guide site. It's twice a day or whenever we push a change, it builds out the full site to HTML and JavaScript files that load immediately. So, which means I'm not stressing about server load, which we were even talking about before this presentation started. So yeah, in general, it's really a huge part of our focus was keeping things as simple as possible, partially because of timeline. The turnaround was just a couple weeks from deciding we wanted to do this to releasing it. We're also a nonprofit, so keeping it cheap was very much on our minds. And for me personally, like I've made more sites than I'd like to admit that were like Rails apps or had this big backend that really didn't need that kind of complicated things in a way that made maintenance hard, that made kind of working with folks that like weren't necessarily familiar with the backend a lot harder. So I'm definitely at the point where if it can be a spreadsheet, at least in a significant way, it really should be a spreadsheet or something like this. So yeah, kind of onto what our big design constraints were and the things we needed to prioritize. So here's a Block Club article, 1 in 5 Chicago students lacks broadband. So we're really seeing right now, as everybody is on a Zoom call right now, if you're watching this or watching online, really seeing the internet is a very necessary utility. It's not a luxury like I think we've become kind of accustomed to thinking about it in a lot of ways. Network speed, mobile data, their accessibility issues for getting information. So this was something we knew needed to be our first priority. Anything we did needed to be very like mobile first. It needed to load quickly. It needed to be easy for people to get to, and ideally have ways for people to access without a connection at all. But at the same time, to clarify, like broadband connection, a lot of people are accessing on mobile data, even if they don't have like an in-home Wi-Fi connection. So the way we did that, again, it's a static site. So really kind of tried to keep things as simple as possible. And this is from Google Pagespeed Insights, if people are familiar, which is a number that I probably obsessed over a little too much because it's one metric. It's definitely an imperfect metric of just kind of site speed performance, like how quickly when I go to this link will all these information show up. So yeah, we really focused on keeping it as lightweight and quick to load as humanly possible. There's no map. There's nothing like a geocoder. Everything, the second you get to the site, once it's usable, you're not making any more like network requests. It's all loaded. All the searches are just going to be on your phone, just to keep things as like fast as possible. Everything is gzip compressed. The caching is super aggressive. Like could get into the details more and more, but it was definitely something we really focused on. At the same time, we're using a JavaScript framework, Gatsby for the static site generation, and then which uses React. So something that I definitely like to improve, at least going forward or in different projects, is that means we're loading like a solid amount of JavaScript before I even started actually writing in code. So that's something that would be worth improving on for sure, but I think we definitely got it to a good place for where we're at now. And I think this is a really useful design constraint and also an important one, because just because COVID has put kind of a spotlight on it doesn't mean this wasn't an issue already. kind of lack of access to strong data connections is a real, it's a real like accessibility issue for anything that's kind of put out on the internet, especially as sites like by and large are taking up more and more data, which costs money. If you're on a mobile data plan and you go over, that's money that like people have to pay. So I think it was definitely something that was good to focus on here, but isn't only relevant in a pandemic. So another way that we tried to do this is actually the print view. Definitely one of the times I focused more on a print style sheet than ever. This was another way we thought of kind of trying different ways of people being able to access. So if you print the site, it's kind of a distinct view that really focuses on showing information that might not have been displayed. It might have been behind a link before. So really just thinking through different ways, like if the social service organizations we're talking to printed out a list and handed it to somebody they work with, like what are the different ways people might share this? And here is kind of a walkthrough of our SMS flow. This is another thing, really thinking through like what are other ways that people could access it. So one thing you can see here is there is no chatbot. I have personally had bad experiences with chatbots where they don't know what I'm saying and I get frustrated and leave. And I think keeping things as simple as possible, that's something where we also kind of learned a bit from Outlier Media in Detroit, as a journalism outlet that does something pretty similar to this, just really text 1 for this, text 2 for this, make it as simple as possible for people to get the information they want. And one thing we really focused on here was, you'll see kind of towards the end, this probably wasn't the best example, but like a phone number is in there. A lot of the text lines that are out right now are really useful, but are mostly for notifications. Like they'll give you a link to something else. But if you're worried about data right now, that's probably not ideal. So we try to include information like description, address, phone number, more than just kind of like, here's the link so you can get to this other thing. We really wanted to put as much of it in the text as possible. And this is one thing where we couldn't do it fully static, but it isn't, it's using kind of serverless functions, which basically it's, you only pay for the seconds of server time instead of like hours that something's running. So at the same time, if you're thinking through this a bit, there's a pretty clear misstep where the number you text to get to this is primarily on a website, which if you've already gotten to kind of defeats the purpose. So that's something we're kind of actively working through. How do we promote this kind of outside of the website itself? Because if you're there, that's definitely going to be an easier experience to use. And in general, yeah, if you can get to that point, even if data access is a limit, we're kind of thinking through what are the best ways that people would access when the site is is optimized for it as much as possible. So then translation. I've never translated into so many languages, not even close. This is just a list from our drop-down menu, and it's everything from English to Yoruba to Urdu. Like there are a lot of different languages. One thing that's also pretty clear from the site is that not all of our resource text is translated. That was going to be a pretty tall order for like 1,400 different resources that we have to translate all the names and descriptions. But in talking to folks and in getting that feedback along the way, people really said that like the confidence that people have, like with a lot of folks, they have limited English proficiency, so they'll be a lot more comfortable filtering and being able to use the navigation when it's in a language they're more comfortable in. Even if they can speak a bit of English. So in general, they said that like even if we can't do all the resources, this would still be useful. But yeah, it got there are some quirks for sure. I learned that if you mix left to right and right to left text, it's hard to even copy and paste it. My text editor really didn't like me, and I got pretty confused for a while. But yeah, and then all the details of like GSM7 text encoding versus Unicode and SMS messages, which yeah, it's not something I really thought I'd learn about during the middle of a pandemic, but we're there. And all this we really got from looking at, we'd actually FOIA'd for CPS data on languages spoken in households. So we tried to base our list off of that. So we're still working on outreach because this is a lot of different communities represented here. But we definitely are happy with the amount of languages we've gotten so far. And so if you build it kind of the field of dreams thing, they won't come. It doesn't work like that. Just because we have this resource doesn't mean we've gotten this massive influx of traffic immediately. We're really focused on distribution right now. We're working to get it out in everything from postcards to physical distribution, really just thinking through different ways of making this accessible to folks. Because yeah, things like don't just kind of explode because you want them to. It's really something that we're trying to put time into making sure people can access. So what now? I think in this process, it was really useful kind of learning from things I've done in the past and like learning from the processes we kind of put into place at City Bureau around tech work and non-tech work. That's all been really valuable. And I think right now it's this weird situation where I've tried to be critical about like how I bring technology into different situations, but we're in this moment where tech is more essential to our daily lives than ever. And at the same time, this pandemic is making it more and more clear that not only are the disparities in our society really, really bad right now, but they existed beforehand. A lot of this isn't new. Lack of access to network connections isn't new. Content not being translated as well. So it's really gotten me thinking kind of where do we go from here? With all of these pre-existing issues, there's been a lot of talk of going back to normal, but also trying to build something better than normal. So I guess the thing that I've been thinking about and kind of invite other folks to think about is what can we build that's better and more equitable than what we started here in terms of resource access, in terms of technology, and kind of how can community-based technology, civic tech fit into that? And so, yeah, I've got time for questions.
All right. Thanks, Pat.
Yeah, thanks, Pat.
So this is Cameron back on the line. We've got so first I'll say what an amazing project. Thank you for walking us through. And it's really exciting to see how timely the resource is and also how contextualized it is within some of the broader challenges we face. So thank you for walking through that. We have a question in the YouTube chat where others can submit questions as well. But the first question was, how many people did you reach with your initial surveys?
Oh, that is a good question that I should have looked at beforehand. It was definitely, I want to say it was in the ballpark of 100. And this was pretty focused initially on social service providers. So we weren't trying to get a significant cross section of Chicago as a whole, because on that timeline it wasn't doable. But we did get a good amount of folks. But yeah, I don't have the number in front of me.
All right, so this is Joel again. We have another question. Would you say this is primarily for phone access, or the web version is the main story?
I guess phone access in terms of smartphone mobile access. Yeah, I think we've definitely gotten a lot more use of the site, but I mean, it'll work on desktop as well. But kind of we started with mobile first, just because that's a lot of the ways people will. Oh, I just got a Slack message that 500 people replied to that survey. Thank you, Daryl.
Thanks, Daryl.
Oh, Joel, I think you're muted.
It's only a matter of time. Who had that one on bingo? So yeah, the question is, could you tell us a little bit more about the history of the City Bureau, how it came together?
Oh, wow. Is that one of my bosses that put that in there? No, City Bureau, yeah, we were founded in 2015, really focused on, I mean, we've got some of it in there, but making journalism more equitable, making sure that journalism isn't just something that is kind of parachuting in and writing stories about people, but that it's a civic process that folks feel like they can participate in from a bunch of different communities, but especially communities of color that traditionally are not super well represented in the way media looks at, the way media writes.
We got another question. So you talked about not rebuilding the wheel, and I'm wondering, in your consideration of whether or not to use Airtable or to look at the data-made projects, were these ideas that were tossed around as a team, or were they tools that you had on hand that you were thinking about using? How did you figure out which pieces were going to work? Can you talk a little bit more about how you made those decisions?
Yeah, so I mean, some of that, like those were pretty easy for me because one of them I helped work on, and then like another one is the thing that we built that off of. So in this case, it was a little easier, but in general, at least on that past project, I think it was a lot of just looking around and trying to familiarize ourselves with what was available. Like in this case, yeah, it was pretty cut and dry because we had it there accessible. But I think in general, it's been searching around. Like originally for the reentry project, it was at Hack Night, so Datamate was a lot more clear. But I mean, yeah, it was tools we were familiar with, trying to keep things as lightweight as possible. But I don't know if there was a specific research project process there.
All right, let's see. We got another one. What ways are you trying to build awareness of this resource?
Yeah, so as of today, actually, it's on chicago.gov/coronavirus. So we've been talking to the city about making it aware, as well as the county actually sent out a text alert. I think it was last week or the week before, kind of linking to it. We've been reaching out to different mutual aid groups because a lot of them are doing kind of wellness check-in calls where they are either looking at lists of resources or compiling them. So yeah, it's been a combination of reaching out to a lot of the folks that are in the resource guide right now, as well as just different places that people are accessing, like talking to Chicago Public Schools about a lot of the food pickup sites, seeing if that's something we can work on. But yeah, we're looking into everything from radio to like Facebook and Google ads. We're trying a lot right now.
All right, thanks, Pat. We got another question. What's your work look like outside of the pandemic?
Um, I'm guessing that's going to be like city bureaus generally.
I can't tell if it's more general or specific, but maybe
I'm gonna go
whichever
with,
you want to feel.
I guess, yeah, I mostly work on the Documenters project, which has changed a lot because we are training and paying people to take notes or live tweet at public meetings, which for a while just were totally not happening. And now they're remote. So I think that's changed things a bit, but in general, we are still, people can sign up now at documenters.org if you're interested. We're still sending people out to public meetings, well, I guess staying in, and they're calling in to take notes of what's going on, because after kind of an initial hiatus, a lot of these agencies are still holding public meetings where decisions are still getting made.
All right, let's see. And how are you measuring usage/impact? And how much do you estimate the website phone access is being used on a daily basis?
Yeah, so we have a Google Analytics set up with some of the anonymized IP settings just to kind of try and make it a little less big brothery. So we've been tracking it that way, as well as all the inbound texts that we get. Like we get logs of those, so we can have a sense of like how much that's getting used. So in general, I think like web access is definitely a way, but also looking at kind of like other organizations that are sharing it, because that might not show up directly in traffic. Like if an organization, if a mutual aid group is using it for their hotline, like you might not see all the numbers of people who didn't access it directly, but knowing that they're using it definitely means that it's getting out a bit more. So it's a combination of like mostly web metrics with kind of also seeing kind of qualitatively where are we getting it out to.
We can also send out the documenters link through the YouTube chat as well for those who are interested. We have another question, which is we're wondering if you've been thinking about a way to estimate cost requirements, lift time that services require. So like paperwork and identification or wait time.
Yeah, so a lot of the information that's on there right now was really based off of what we felt like we could reliably give people. So like ours is probably the finest grain detail. Basically, we don't want to give people bad information because we knew that that would like, even if it was like 60% sure. Um, so that's something like we've tried to address because I know the unemployment system in particular has been brutal. So we haven't really focused on that just because I think we might be able to do it for a subset of resources. But in general, everything's changing frequently. That's changing so frequently. But we have actively been kind of like looking at feedback we've gotten of like what kinds of information people are looking at. And for things like that, like we do actually have a link in the resources to a video of somebody describing like how do you apply to for unemployment in Illinois because the state government's website doesn't necessarily do the best job. So we're looking at ways of addressing that, but also trying to factor in that we'd rather give slightly less information than information we're not really sure about.
All right, so I think we got time for one more question. Let's see. What was the process of sourcing, evaluating, and verifying sources? And are there longer term plans to keep the data up to date?
Yeah, so sorry, just I got distracted. Yeah, I think in general, it was starting with like lists that have been compiled because like we said, like a lot of the mutual aid groups as well as like other existing nonprofit organizations have done a really incredible job of like compiling this stuff so quickly. So starting with a lot of those, also looking at kind of existing lists like Greater Chicago Food Depository has theirs. So starting with some of those and like triaging things that didn't necessarily seem right, like things that we could flag in bulk a lot easier. But then really combing through and doing some straight journalism fact checking, a lot of really in-depth resource to resource, making sure that the information we had there was something that we could feel reasonably confident was good, but also actively looking at we've had suggestions of resources that people wanted added to the site. So whenever that happens, checking that out and then approving it once we feel like we have a better sense. But yeah, and then we've had some ongoing conversations internally of like what should be on the site. Like right now, we don't show things that are primarily like volunteer based because we wanted to keep it focused. There's a lot of other places to find that information. So yeah, I guess in general, kind of determining what we wanted to be on the site and then pretty much doing fact checking.
All right. Well, thanks, Pat. Everybody at home,
you.
give a virtual round of applause.
Thank you.
So if you want to drop off the screen share, but you're welcome to hang out. We have some announcements and stuff. So if you've never been to Shy Hack Night before, I got some stuff to tell you. And if you have, I'll keep it brief. So at Shy Hack Night, we used to all meet in person to do these things, but now we are doing them in Slack. What is Slack? Well, the best way to find out is to play around with it. So go to slackme, slackme.shyhacknight.org, and that will put you through to our Slack channel. And where should they go when they get there, Cameron?
That's a good question, Joel. So our Slack channel, they can go to our Shy Hack Night remote channel, and I'll send both those links through the YouTube chat for those who are looking for it.
All right.
And we'll see you there. Just for your reference, we'll be doing introductions, a little bit of socializing, and then our breakout groups. So we hope you can join us. Also, thank Pat. I know Pat's still on the call, so thank you for your presentation, and thanks to Joel for hosting.
Hey, thanks, Cameron.
Joel,
thanks, Pat.
Did you have anything else?
I think that's it. Pat, unmute and join us for this, huh? Ready? On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Go forth and hack.
I don't know how the timing went there.
Good enough.
Bye.